Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Happily Kitchen Gardens webinar session that we're having this morning. We've got some fantastic guests with us. My name's Adam Henson. I'm a farmer in the Cotswolds. I also run the Cotswold Farm Park, which is a tourist enterprise. And I've been working very closely with Matthew Reimer, who started the business Happerley a number of years ago to look at food provenance and traceability and trust in the food supply chain. And using some very good people on his advisory board. The company has grown in interest right across the UK, and we've been working very closely with some large supermarkets, with some large food suppliers, as well as lots of producers around the UK. And our most recent project is that we opened Happily England at Banbury, and they converted British home stores into a huge food hall where there are Happily Gold providers providing beer, cheese, veg, meat, you name it, it's all in there. And the council there have regenerated Banbury, spent £70 million, and have welcomed Happily on board. And I have to say, having visited it and opened it a few weekends ago, it looks absolutely magnificent and has brought a huge amount of life back to the town. And now there's lots of interest from other towns and cities to Happily wanting to look at the same thing. And I think there's a growing trend towards buying local, thinking about sustainability, supporting local growers and producers, and people thinking more and more about where their food comes from and health and well-being. So let me pass over to Matthew Reimer, who will introduce the concept of Happily Kitchen Gardens.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks everyone for attending this morning. So this is largely going to be a sort of Q&A session, just to talk through what we're about here with some interested parties and stakeholders ahead of going more public on this in the weeks ahead. So I think it was Mark Twain that said that there's no such thing as a new idea. It's a reinvention of old ideas, and in a sense that's very relevant to what we're doing here. So I founded Happily with the support of many others, including Adam, to simply empower the consumer to know the journey of their food and deliver transparency in terms of the ingredient supply network, to create a level playing field, to secure the premium of provenance, looking at that very much from a farmer angle. And then as the journey has carried on, what one realizes that this is as important for the consumer as it is for the farmer or grower to tell the story, for them to know the story with confidence, to make conscious buying decisions, and all the intermediaries in between that form our food supply network to be able to trade in an honest way without disingenuous marketing and so on, sort of undercutting premium or creating a very commodity-driven market. So engagement and consumer engagement is very much sort of part of our remit. And going back to the Twain quote, you know, market gardens have been around for a long time, but they've dwindled in recent years. It's a reinvention of that market garden, so you're not delivering produce without a market, without a contract, without a customer base. It's using a whole range of new technologies and a lot of skill set and experience that's been developed by Ross Geach, who I met a few years ago down outside Padstow, and it amazed me that with 3 or 4 acres, with minimal irrigation, 1 polytunnel, he could sustain a very good living for himself, or a reasonable living, and employ someone on a very reasonable pay full time by contracting and selling directly to a range of restaurants and increasingly more recently to consumers. So holding that thought, I thought, gosh, you know, and that without subsidy, you know, without a dependence on migrant workers. And I thought that yeah, and with the trends now catching up, you know, the need and opportunity to introduce new talent into the farming industry, the drive from the consumer, it just seemed a very good time to tie up with Ross and try and create an umbrella and a support network. And it's another reinvention, if you like, of the old traditional kind of farming cooperatives like the Milk Marketing Board and so on, that all went to the wall a decade or two ago. But I think now more than ever, growers need to work together, market together, create a standard, and knowledge share. And this is really where Happerley can play its role alongside Ross and his team. And again, you know, it's not a new idea. Engaging food production locally with the local community, and for small sustainable farms, creating local employment, and supplying local markets. And so, you know, all these three aspects are kind of coming back into play now, but with a new you know, with a new agenda to them. So I'm you know, trying to keep this reasonably short as an intro. I'm never very good at that, but I'm delighted now for Ross to explain a little more about what we're offering here.
Yeah, so Ross, let me introduce you, Ross. So Ross is founder of Padstow Kitchen Gardens, and your journey has been a long one, and but with some success. So for those people who have tuned in and are listening, can you just explain a little bit about your journey, and then also the opportunity that you think you may be able to create with Matthew?
Yeah, sure. I'll also point out that there aren't two Ross Geaches on the panel. Jack Stein is on there, and he used my link, so he comes up with my name. He's a bit of a fanboy of mine, so he just. So basically, I wasn't always in the kitchen garden. I was a chef. I worked for Jack's company. I worked there from a very young age, washing dishes all the way up to becoming a chef. One of his head chefs, head chef at his cafe. And as much as I really loved it, I loved working for Rick, and I loved the food. I loved the ethos, all the local produce. I've got a family farm, which I'm the heir to. And I didn't know much about farming. I just knew going out there and playing around on the tractors and whatnot, but I wasn't a farmer at all. And I started to get a bit worried that as my parents were getting older, I was going to inherit a farm that was potentially, you know, I didn't know if it was making a lot of money. They were just getting by. It was ticking them over. But if I wanted to go onto it full time, I didn't know what I would have to do. So we set up the kitchen garden on a very small scale in a walled garden. And it was great from the start, but you know, I was very lucky to have the support of Jack's company. That kind of whatever comes in the door looking fresh and is good will just go on the menu, which isn't the case with a lot of restaurants. But I had their full support. Lots of chopping and changing, lots of mistakes, lots of Googling. I didn't know. I wasn't trained at all. And then after about 5 years, I really felt that the garden was working as a success, and it was too hard to be running the kitchen garden and be working for Rick Stein's company. So I went part-time as a chef, still carried on the garden, and then at the end of that year, I went full-time. So I've been full-time now for, work this out, about eight or 9 years, but it took about 5 years to kind of get there. And you know, as I said, made a lot of mistakes along the way, grew way too many of some crops, didn't have a continuity of crops, didn't know enough about rotations, and now, you know, I kind of feel that I'm there. Obviously there's always going to be mistakes, because as a farmer, as you know, Adam, you are governed by the weather, which is one of the hardest things to deal with, because it's uncontrollable. You can only kind of hit, you know, help yourself, really, can't you? So that's the, you know, one of the main points. But we now sell to lots of restaurants around the Padstow area. We sell to farm shops. We have our own little honesty box farm shop, which will work in some places better than it will others. But it's doing well. We've set up a veg box scheme, which we haven't massively pushed. You know, we're no Riverford by any means, but that again, that kicked off a lot more during COVID. So before, I was only doing a few boxes in and out just to a little bit of extra money. As soon as the supermarket started running low on food and everybody was grabbing food and toilet roll, I set up a veg box business, and it went out of control to begin with. I had to put a limit. I think I sold 50 boxes in 24 hours, and I could have sold 150, but I couldn't physically or have enough crops for that. That number's dropped a lot now. Now things have gone back slightly to normality, but off the back of COVID, I've got a veg box scheme which is ticking over quite nicely. So that's, again, talking about how the consumers have changed, wanting to know a lot more about where their produce comes from. And also one thing that really helped me during COVID was people who never bothered coming to my farm shop because they maybe couldn't be bothered with the trip, they're too busy with their life, or they thought it was too expensive in comparison to the supermarket, which it is a lot more money than going to a supermarket. They got to taste the produce and they realised how much better it actually is, and it's made a massive difference. So some of those customers that, they come out, they're like, I don't know how we're ever going to buy tomatoes from a supermarket ever again. It's changed their view. So getting people to try this produce is the most important, and they get hooked on it. Basically, that they struggle with having a supermarket vegetable.
Thank you, Ross. Ross, could you just explain if you think this is scalable? Then, well, you clearly do because you're speaking to us today. To be able to take this out onto farms across the country and make those connections with other restaurants, you think this is a path that you can help and advise and support people on across the UK? Yeah,
I mean, it's something that before I even met Matthew, I used to think, I wonder if you could roll Padstow kitchen gardens out, like around, because I was thinking of places that are really hot on provenance, whether it be places that I know. There are lots of places in the country, so I don't want to sound like I'm running any others down, but I know Bristol, for example, that whole area around the Cotswolds, lots of places in Gloucestershire, lots of places along the south and east coast. And I thought, I bet you could put one in each county, but then I just sort of thought, well, I haven't got the time to do that. I haven't got the backing. I don't know anybody that would be interested. So as soon as Matthew mentioned it to me, it made perfect sense. And I think that one thing we've discussed is rather than just setting up a kitchen garden, growing what you think is right to grow, or growing what is right to grow for me down in Padstow, it's about getting all the infrastructure in place, not growing anything until you've had the discussions with the restaurants, hotels, farm shops and farmers markets around you. So you need to work out what your market is first. And then, but that's the good thing about growing on this small scale. You can chop and change.
Great, thank you, Ross. If I could now hand over to Jack Stein, who's the creative director for the Rick Stein Group. Jack, can you give us a restaurateur's point of view? Because you obviously know Ross very well and work with him very closely. But restaurateurs and chefs can be a bit fussy, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing with Ross, where the history with Ross and how we've come to use him and work with him so closely, which I think is a key to this business model being successful, because like it or not, people listen to what chefs say and what chefs are buying, what chefs put on their menu. And when, most chefs asked about the most important thing to them, it's always their ingredients. And I think if you get a good group of chefs to support a kitchen garden, to talk about on their menus, they can then expand their offering to, like Ross has done, veg boxes and all the other things that he talked about. But where Ross has got unique is that he was a chef. He understands how chefs think. He understands about the way products come into a kitchen, the way that the products are processed into the recipes that we make. And when Ross first started back along, I'll tell a story, but he, I remember going in there one day and he had cucumbers on almost every single dish. And I said, what's going on here, Ross? I said, we've got so many cucumbers on, it's crazy. He's like, well, I've got a lot of cucumbers in the garden. And I was like, well, if Rick comes in, he's going to be a bit upset that suddenly all of his recipes have got cucumber added to them. But actually, when we thought about it, we talked about it, he wouldn't have been, because he would have understood quite well, because Rick comes from the Cotswolds himself, that farmers, when they have a glut, they need to get rid of. And that's where the chefs have to understand the relationship with their kitchen gardener. They're great for marketing. It's fantastic to have Ross there. He bends over backwards for our clients. If we have a cookery school thing, we want to bring them up. If we have press, we want to bring them to. But the unwritten rule there is that when he needs us to buy stuff off him, we are very flexible. And it is difficult. Chefs can be, like you say, Adam, can be quite particular about what they buy, but when they see the results of having a close relationship with a kitchen garden in their local area, that they can say this is from there and point at the farm almost, or they can give a little anecdote of the chef or the grower or the owner. I think it really adds value to our product in the restaurant. And I won't say it's always been smooth sailing with Ross. Obviously, it's very difficult. Like Ross said, he's made mistakes, and I'm sure we've made mistakes our end as well. But I think he's uniquely positioned now to have assimilated all that information, and having worked with chefs, not just our chefs. And Rick is massive. He loves local produce, and he really doesn't care what it looks like. He's always been of the opinion that ugly food tastes better. But some other chefs are much more kind of they're much more dogmatic about what the kind of veg they want to buy. So it is a very important relationship. But I feel that if you have a kitchen garden like Ross, or somebody that's set up in your area and you're a restaurant, you'd be mad not to really engage with them and just say, phone Ross and say, how does this work for you? What happens if you've got 2 tons of cucumbers? And he'd say, just whack them on the menu. And a very famous chef, Dan Barber, who you may have heard of from Bluestone in New York State. And when he had Bluestone in New York, and he had a glut of asparagus, and he put it on every single course of his tasting menu as a joke because he had so much of it, and then had the New York Times food critic come in that night, and he was thinking that he's going to get absolutely annihilated because it's such a crazy thing to do. He actually got a glowing review because the food journalist knew full well what he was doing. And I think this is where the reality, it's very nice to have an Instagram picture of some local food that's kind of could be from anywhere, but the reality of working with a farmer and with a kitchen gardener is you actually start to understand the seasons better as a chef and portray that better on your menus. And I think that that's the key. And that's, if you get a kitchen garden and you're like that you've set up with Ross helping, and then you're getting people come to that kitchen garden to see where their produce is. Chefs will come first, and then the public. You've really succeeded, and that's where Ross is at the moment. People are turning up, looking at his kitchen garden because they've seen it on Countryfile and Saturday Kitchen. They've seen it on our menus, and a real success story, which I really, really genuinely believe is, when you look at Gloucester Services, you look at that, and you think how, when that idea first came out, how would that ever work? And you see how successful that's been, and you think this is the kind of thing that I genuinely think is a growth industry, and I've not got any skin in this game at all.
Thank you very much, Jack. Let's pass over to Ollie Hudson. So Ollie, head kitchen gardener in the Pig Hotel Group. The Pig Hotel Group is hugely successful and very, very popular. And so can we get your point of view? Because you obviously have your own gardens as well, connected to some of the hotels. How does it work for you, Ollie?
That's right, Adam. So yeah, we've got 7 hotels with kitchen gardens across the south of England, and where we have relatively small spaces, from half an acre up to probably 1.5, maybe 2 acres at some of the bigger properties, we can't produce huge amounts, so we do have to supplement in from local suppliers. And if we produce maybe 10-20% of one crop, it's fantastic having people in the area, like we have Ross down at our new property in Harlem Bay, just outside Padstow. We grow the similar crops. Me and Ross are nattering on the phone, most days anyway, about nerdy veg chat. And it just allows our chefs to be able to supplement it within our 25-mile radius that we sort of take as a rule on our menus.
And just to give an idea of the scale, with your gardens, how many staff are you needing to employ to get it going? And let's ask that first of all to Ollie and then to Ross.
So it's a little bit different how Ross and I do it. We're always joking about the fact that our gardens are show gardens as well, so they have to look pristine, and we end up hiring more staff just to do weeding and make things look perfect. So our sort of operating level is normally 3 kitchen gardeners, covering harvesting and weeding and everything else that goes with it over the week, and supplying for our chefs. Obviously, Ross can run it with less people because it's sort of served a different purpose.
Yeah, how busy is it for you, Ross?
It is really busy in the summer months. Lots of planning. A really good point that I've said to Matthew a lot is about keeping the garden a really reasonable size. So to make money you want 2 to 2.5 acres, then you can make a bit more money. If you start going over that 5 to 6 acres, unless you've got loads of demand that will pay good, your turnover will be right up here. Your profit will be exactly the same as when you're down there. There's a very fine line, and I made that mistake. I did go a bit too big, and now gradually over 2 years I've slightly lowered. But as we were saying about staff levels, Ollie's kitchen garden, I was there on Saturday up at the Pig. Everything has to look perfectly neat and tidy. You won't see hardly any weeds. They're intercropping, so when they pull out the old crop, there's another crop, because he can't have guests coming staying in the hotel and seeing that garden and they're being half empty. Whereas my garden, you know, we're working on kind of 40 metre by 10 metre patches at a time. Sometimes they might have gone to seed. We haven't, you know, we've harvested them. The rest has gone to seed. We haven't had a chance to flail mower it or to pull it up. And when Ollie's dad come out to the farm, he goes, "Well, this kitchen garden isn't very tidy, is it?" And me and Ollie kind of looked at each other. I said, "Well, the difference is this kitchen garden is for profit, and yours is for show." And that's the kind of, you know, that's the truth of it, really. And you know, you still have to keep it neat and tidy. You need that sort of garden maintenance for all sorts of reasons. It has to be kept clean because of pests and weeds and things like that. But there are times on a bigger scale when you're not using sprays that you're going to get weeds, and you're going to have a crop that goes to seed that you kind of forget about. Or where we are, we get really bad sea winds, and you could have the most beautiful bed of spinach that you've ever seen, and then overnight you go there next morning and all the leaves are black, and then you're trying to sell it to Jack to use for spinach soup.
The thing, but what I would say there about the Pig as an example, what the Pig shows is the amount of people who eat and stay at the Pig, who you go out and you see them in the gardens walking around being really interested, like you would see people at Chelsea Flower Show walking around looking at flowers. For me, I don't understand why you grow flowers. It doesn't make any sense. You can't eat them, but well, some you can. But what it shows is there's a real want and desire to see stuff growing, and it's a very, like, I think that gives a lot of, you know, I know Ross what he's saying about his farm, but his farm is beautiful in its way, but it's a real farm, you know. Whereas I'm not going to be quite so nasty to you, Ollie, but you know, yours is a show garden. But the amount of people that go and see it shows how much people want to see this scaled up. I'd imagine if you could do a Pig garden in every market town, people would be similarly interested.
Indeed.
It is worth saying that we are a productive space as well as a show garden. Everything in our gardens does end up in the kitchen.
Yeah, all right, Ross.
I corner a little bit there.
Well done, Ollie. Well done. So we've got lots of people who are attending this conference. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, then do by all means raise your hand signal, and I'll try and bring you into the conversation. So if anybody wants to ask a question, do let me know. And if any of the other,
can I just say before we do that there is a briefing that will give plenty of detail behind this, an outline of detail that will be sent to everybody attending shortly after this webinar.
And it is being recorded, so it will be shown as well. It can be retrieved, Matthew, can't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So anybody got any questions? Oh, here we are. What's James? So you're allowed to talk.
Do we have to allow attendees to speak now? Or?
Just trying to. This is my technical skills. Hang on, bear with me.
So,
On mute. I can't seem to get James on board. Hang on.
Can you hear me, Adam?
Oh, here we go.
Yes, I can. Here we go. Beautiful.
Right.
Far away, James.
Better that you can hear me but not see me. So I'm Chief Executive of Plunkett Foundation, which is a national charity supporting communities to set up community-owned businesses. So we've been involved in the past with many sort of community-owned farms and community-owned agricultural schemes. And a lot of the conversations today is sort of skewed slightly towards the sort of higher end of the market. But I just wondered whether the panel and their associated businesses have thought about working with community-owned agriculture on a much sort of smaller scale as a way of involving local communities in the production and the retailing of local food.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer a bit of that. So we've actually, with our connections to local community colleges, although Ross doesn't know this, I'm about to phone him up and ask his permission to bring some students up. And I think there is, like you say, it is higher end, but I think that community projects are so important, and I think it's a natural progression for us. I mean, Ross and I were talking a few years ago that we might work some sort of community involvement into the kitchen garden at some point, bringing community gardeners up there, giving them an area potentially that they could use. Well, we never really picked up on it, but I think the point with the higher end is it's a start. And I know that people often accuse sort of kitchen gardeners and farmers markets of being essentially quite middle class and actually ignoring the kind of real issues of food poverty. And I think that's a really important connection that we can help with. But I think that what we have to start with a model that works, from what we're doing as chefs in our kitchens, which probably are the higher end of the market. But what you want to do is build a structures that help bring down the costs and make it more accessible to everybody. So I think there's two aspects there. I think it's right that you point out that we are higher end, but I think that we as chefs and growers are really keen to see how we might better integrate with community services, community gardens, and things that can help across all aspects of society.
Well said. If I could add to that, is part of, and you'll see this in the paper afterwards, but part of the process here, in terms of getting to know your community, is a regional engagement audit that Happerley would undertake on behalf of that operator ahead of any sowing, which would address because there are procurement changes in public sector and education you might be aware of too. So there's the opportunity here to look at not just the restaurants, but the community groups, the schools, and all the opportunities within that 25-mile radius of that Happerley Kitchen Garden site. There is, this is about creating, because ultimately agriculture, horticulture has to be commercially sustainable. This is a commercially sustainable model that we believe by almost the know-how share, what Ross can deliver and his team, and we can deliver, as a brand with identity, with marketing resource, with the Happerley transparency, developing the client base and the customer base. But it just going back to the pig, which is undoubtedly high end, but as Jack says, it's the experiential aspect of that engages the consumers. And you know what, I think there are plenty of consumers that might pay a little bit more for, and in season, veg needn't be, or fruit needn't be any more expensive, and there's often a lot less expensive native to this country when than being out of season. So I'm very conscious of this. I wouldn't want this project to be niched as high end, but look, it needs a bread and butter income, and then it's how we can work. James, I'm really delighted you're on the call with organisations like Plunkett on how we can involve the communities. One aspect of this is we're not just seeking farmers with land or landowners with land that could be rented with certain outbuildings. We want both of those, but also potential operators that could be complete new entrants and newcomers. And that's where we can be very flexible too in how we can work with them. So we can marry up the two and bring some fresh blood into farming. And I think that's very important. And that again is all about working with and finding out, what interest groups and what passions lie within that 25-mile radius of the site and working with them.
James, does that answer your question?
Yes, it has. Well answered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I've got a question from Fiona Steele. Are you in discussion with any Oxfordshire restaurants to supply them? Matthew, my understanding is that this is very early days, and today is a discussion about what is going to happen, not what is already happening.
No, so we have and we are turning restaurants happily transparent, which means they have to be transparent with their ingredient supply chain. But we are early days on this. Fiona, for those that don't know, does a fantastic job leading Good Food Oxford.
I think with regards to finding the restaurants, the most important way that will happen will probably be through social media. It's, you know, it's the way to target everybody. I think if you can find chefs in Oxfordshire, just for example, because that's who Fiona's asking about, if you could get them to follow the Instagram page that we're going to set up, and we'll start explaining, you know, our ethos and our transparency and how great our produce is going to be, how fresh and healthy, no spray it's going to be. Hopefully they would come on board, follow that Instagram, follow the story as the garden goes from being a field to a kitchen garden. And then, as Jack was saying earlier, they've got a real story for their menu. It isn't just a bag of salad that you've got in from a generic wholesaler. It's a certain variety of salad that you've worked with that gardener, because that's the salad that you like, and you're proud to have that salad on your menu.
And that's, that's well said. That's a key role of Happerley, which is acting as that conduit of information. So through that QR on that menu, they can actually then see the whole story, and it secures the provenance premium of that Happerley kitchen garden. You know, which might lead to the consumer, we'd hope, you know, be willing to pay a few points more, perhaps, you know, knowing the freshness of it, the quality of it, and the story behind it. I mean, Ross, that backs up what Jack was saying. We've always said, Ross, that the moment you have a chef on your site, that it transforms them as a customer, and no different to holding an open day on a kitchen garden and inviting the public and doing cook-offs and showcases, which is all part of what we would help with. It enlightens the consumer.
Yeah, when I first set up Padstow Kitchen Garden and I was looking for more customers, it was pre-Instagram. It was when Twitter was big. I just put, look, if you're a chef that's thinking of buying local produce, come up to the farm, have a walk around. I'll give you a 20-minute tour. We'll make a sausage bat using sausages from our own pigs and a local baker. And I think our local Padstow Beer Company gave everyone that you had a coffee or a beer. And, you know, I've still got lots of those customers because they actually for once got to see exactly where their produce was coming from.
Yeah, I think on another point there, I mean, one of the biggest things that I see as a chef changes that have happened in the past 10 years is it's gone from, chefs started visiting Cornwall, you know, the various suppliers in Cornwall from London, probably about 10 years ago, wasn't it, Ross? Like the sort of, you know, Gizzies and their, you know, James Lowe and James Knappett and those guys. And they were looking for a point of difference on their menu. And actually what they started to do was, you know, I think what chefs do today, like I said earlier on, we are a mouthpiece for the consumer in some respects, because what we're buying, people trust and they want to buy as well, is actually that once you get the chefs coming out to the farm. So in Oxford, once the farm's established, chefs coming out and actually going there and seeing produce, but also interestingly having a two-way conversation. So all good suppliers, like, you know, our local meat supplier Warren's, they're fantastic. When you speak to them, you ask them to do something for you, a test thing, like, and Ross has done this for us as well. He's grown things that they might not work, they might work, but it gives you really start to engage and really value the kitchen garden, and that helps you when you talk to your consumer, because when you have front of house people coming out, you know, who they're your sales team coming out to the kitchen garden and spending some time there, they're actually selling the product to the consumer and then saying, and if you want to go up and visit, they, you know, they do open days or they have a farm shop, etc.
It's great having this conversation, but a bit of a backstory to Happerley is that Matthew has been working very closely with the co-op, Mid-Counties Co-op, and they have a number of nurseries, I think up to 70 nursery schools for children. And they are looking, well, they're already doing a huge amount of education to the children about where their food comes from, getting them to learn about health and well-being and how things grow, and the whole education side around food, which I'm very passionate about. But also then within the co-ops, got Happerley branded products with QR codes so you can see what's behind them. So with your question, James, and also with some of the things we've been talking about, you know, people can get behind the scenes and find out about the farm just by going on the QR code. They don't necessarily have to visit. Obviously, a visit gives you that earthy feeling and you really get a full understanding. But I think that the way we can communicate now is so much stronger. And leading on from that, then, of course, there are so many producers, processors, restaurants and pubs who are also signed up to Happerley, who are now being audited and checked and being able to tell that true story about what's on their menus and what's in their packets and where their food is coming from. And that is becoming quite a big momentum. And I think in today's society is growing all of the time, which is exciting. If it's starting from the children and going right through to adults, and you know, even big suppliers of food like Creed Catering have come on board to be Happerley audited, then I think that's really exciting. We've got another question here from Lindsay Holland. I'm part of a new initiative starting in Cheltenham called TURF, TURF. We're a group of about 40 independent hospitality businesses, including many restaurants. If we were keen to learn more, would anybody happy to jump on a Zoom call with us one week to explain and share details of this amazing concept? Well, I'm sure, Matthew, you would be very happy to speak to Lindsay Holland.
Absolutely, yeah. No, look forward to connecting with you afterwards. See, Cheltenham being so local, I wasn't aware of this, but yeah.
So, Lindsay, we'll sort that out for you, and Matthew will get in touch with you shortly after this to arrange a Zoom call. Does anybody else on the attendees have any more questions? I haven't got any coming through at the moment, as far as I can see. Gents, have you got anything more you want to add to this? I've got a couple of questions, unless you've got anything more you wanted to add, Ollie.
No, especially no. It's really interesting. Everything, really, the whole concept of the project.
I think for me as a farmer, Ross, so you've probably covered a little bit of this. Is that you're out there all weathers. You've got insects and diseases, pests and diseases to deal with. You've got a marketplace that is sometimes challenging. How do you manage your mindset and your business in such a way that keeps it secure? You're talking about moving your turnover up, but your profit didn't increase. Life can be quite difficult out there trying to grow and provide as a primary producer. This sounds like a really exciting project, but it's going to come with its challenges, isn't it?
Yeah, without a doubt. It's you've got to love doing it. I mean, let's just compare it again to the chefing. Do you want to be in a kitchen in the middle of summer? I always laugh because I walk to deliver veg into the kitchens in the summer, and I've got this amazing tan, and they're all very pale. Well, Jack is all year round, but they're all really pale, but it does come with its challenges. You are out there in all weathers, and one thing that I've always kind of stuck by is kitchen garden is spread betting. I could never imagine growing one crop and without using sprays, pesticides, because you would probably lose it. Whereas when you're doing lots of rotations, you're making sure that you've got your salads, you've got your brassicas, you've got your root veg, and then you've got some high-end products like some courgette flowers and some padron peppers that you really put a lot more time and effort into. But it does take a lot of organisation. But I mean, Ollie does this a lot more than I do. I've got a plan in my head of what I'm going to plant, what I'm going to sow. And sometimes the weather might not quite be right, or I might be feeling under the weather, or my seeds haven't arrived. Ollie's at the Pig. They've got a very, very strict planting and sowing calendar. It's massive. It's up on the wall, and they stick by it no matter what weather it is. Whether it's huge. So kind of, I think it's something that I'd like to get Ollie on board with a little bit, because I've been doing this for enough time now to know in my head when's right to sow and when's right to plant. Whereas to have an actual spreadsheet of sowing and planting, similar to the one they've got at the Pig, would make life a lot easier for people that are starting out.
The planning sounds like it's really important, Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, I spend pretty much from now until the new year going through garden plans and seed inventories and sowing plans. And we have a big remit, as we sort of briefly mentioned earlier, that being a productive space as well as a show garden, we need to keep all of those beds full every year, every week of the year. Each garden has somewhere between 60 and 150 beds in it. So there's quite a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Where I am now at head office is our sort of big propagation facility where we grow our seedlings and ship them to our sites. And we found that sort of streamlines the production much easier for us doing it that way. But I mean, it's proper planning, etc. I think now.
So a question for you both from Fiona Steele to Ross and Ollie. Do restaurants need to commit to taking a certain volume of food?
For me, it would all depend on the distance, the travel distance. So I've got a minimum spend of a certain distance. Obviously, Cornwall, I suppose it depends on traffic if you're more in a city, but Cornwall, it can take a lot of time to get from A to B, where we're driving around, it's single lanes that are windy. But if I'm going around Padstow, for instance, there's lots of pubs and restaurants, you've got a little route, you don't mind dropping off 10 quid's worth of salad because you're going 4 doors down and dropping off 40 quid's worth, and then you're going somewhere else spending off 100 quid's worth. But if you're going to have to start traveling a lot, I do put limits on it. But saying that, some chefs might, if you say, look, you need to spend 150 quid for me to be able to drive to you, some chef might think, well, just on veg, but the veg is that fresh, it's being harvested that morning. So like one of my kind of unique selling points is that it's harvested in the morning and I get it to you for lunchtime. And so that has got a 5-day to week life on it. When you've got it from a wholesaler, it could already be that age. So these restaurants that are going to come on board buying from Happerley Kitchen Gardens, they shouldn't be worried about over ordering slightly, as long as they've got the fridge space. But it's kind of, this is again where Happerley Kitchen Garden is going to be unique everyone that sets up, because you might have one slap bang in the middle of a lovely village where all the pubs and restaurants want to buy off you, or you might have one that's a little bit out in the countryside, and then we're going to have to try and help them with some sort of logistics.
And just adding to that, because I think Fiona might have been also sort of questioning whether the forward buying, the contracting with a restaurant, and there will certainly, won't there, be an element of that where there is a sit down. This will be before anything is sown, where a kitchen or restaurant will commit to a growing plan, contractually commit. So within reason, there is a pledge of support. So it's reducing wastage. It's not just a random selection of fruit, veg, and salad cropping. It's something that has been worked out closely with core customers, because the plan is that each Happerley Kitchen Garden, it kicks off its sowing plans already with a core customer base, and then beyond that, one can be working more with community groups, smaller retailers and smaller independents and so on. But it's good having that backbone, and it's big in America, isn't it, Ross? Now the whole contract gardening, working with chefs.
Yeah, I follow a lot of farms on Instagram that are over in New York State, California, Ohio, and they're doing so well, and they're doing real regenerative farming. It's all no dig. They're doing really well. Their local farmers might, I mean, if it wasn't for COVID, I was planning on at the end of this year or the start of next year to travel to the USA and visit a few of these gardens, because I kind of feel that they are 10 to 15 years ahead of where we are in the UK. And we're going to set up the kitchen gardens how I do. So I do dig at the moment, but we're going to start practicing a bit of no dig, some regenerative farming, because the results are seeming really, really good, and it's very good for the planet. I still need to learn a lot more about it, but over in the US, they seem to be doing very, very well.
And Ollie, do you tell your kitchens what you're growing, or do they say what they want, or is it very much a collaborative situation?
It's very collaborative. So I say we're starting our planning this time of year. The very, very first step of that is going to your chefs with a list of everything that was grown this season, and basically getting them to say more or less the same or not at all. And from that, we plan out the gardens, and we sort of work out the varieties. But as we were asked, it's very much the chefs kind of committing to taking twice as much beetroot the following year, or saying, actually, what, don't even bother with salad onions, for instance. So yeah, they're making that commitment at that very early stage, probably 6, 7, 8 months before they're even have access to these products from us.
Thank you.
And I'll just add one more thing to that. That one of the real problems that I've had with restaurants is you sit down with a head chef at the start of the year and you go through everything, and it's not, I've never signed a contract with them, but the head chef could leave. A new head chef comes in, completely different style of food. So that's where you need someone like Jack, who ain't going anywhere. So if one of the head chefs of his sites leave and a new one comes in and they've got their backup, because I've walked in with a ton of courgettes and said, this is what you said you'd buy, I can call someone like Jack. So it's good when there's an executive chef or a manager or an owner, or obviously if the head chef owns his own restaurant, it gives you a bit of a safety net.
Yeah. I've got a question here from David Harrison. Have you any specific aims in terms of how many kitchen gardens you're hoping to get established and over what time scale? And are you expecting existing farming enterprise to diversify to setting up a kitchen garden? Or would folks with a vision for this be looking to buy up a few acres and kick things off that way?
If I can answer that, it's kind of either or. What we'd love to be in a position to do is to be able to match up landowners that could actually make available and rent a piece of land with certain outbuildings with correct access, and match those up to people with the energy and the vision to take it on board. Because in a way, going back to recreating old ideas to create new, one way, a slightly romantic way of looking at this in a way is it's rebooting and starting that family farm, but starting from the core of a crop with a local market. And then certainly as Ross has, you might then have some pigs. They might not in themselves make any money, and probably wouldn't, but the dung from the pigs for the ground can be of value, and you're almost working it back to front. So it is an opportunity for people to enter agriculture, and we'd like to work with good organisations like the Plunkett Foundation and how we can help enable that a little bit by matching up opportunity with talent and community interest. So there's various combinations this can work. But as I was saying before the call, Adam, I think we agreed that to set up a viable livestock enterprise on 3 or 4 acres, is going to be a much higher risk and more difficult than setting up a Happerley kitchen garden. You don't need much equipment. A part of this, and it was going back to a glut of courgettes, chef moves on, but by operating together as a network, we can create a bit of a safety net, and there can be the opportunity for recipe cards, for soups, for jams, for pickles, where we're seeing that there's a particular glut or shortage. It's all about creating a network of people working a bit together with a knowledge share. And that's, as you know, that's what Happerley stands for, is just sat there delivering the information, empowering the consumer to know, creating directions of engagement, and effectively no more than that.
And what sort of the question at the first part of the question, Matthew, was have you got in your mind a number that you would be looking for?
Yeah, so I went off on a tangent. Look, who knows? We Ross and I think and others involved think that this could roll quite quickly. We wanted to get it right. We want to have the right people involved. And so I think it's probably possibly more a case of us staggering the new operators, if you like, or the franchisees, however described. But we feel that the timing is spot on. I could see 50 plus of Happerley kitchen farms across the country. Yeah.
And presumably, you know, these would need to be carefully managed and monitored, so you're not setting up people in competition with one another.
Yes.
You would have, you know, people positioned correctly around the UK to provide the marketplace that there's already been determined, so you don't flood the market.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's just really giving assistance across the, you know, across the board. You know, with 3-year financial forecasts at the beginning, the consultancy throughout. Having people on the ground doing engagement audits, so we're creating that customer base before anything's been sown, yeah, and involving the communities in the journey. But yes, I my gut always is to think, right, this is an opportunity to make certain small family farms and small holdings viable as part of their mix, you know, without you know, a subsidy. But of course, you know, there are opportunities, and I think we've got William on as an attendee, who owns an estate or farm over in Ireland, and going, well, yeah, we've got the land. If we can find somebody, if you think it would work here, we've got the outbuildings and the land. You know, if it creates some rental income or a share farming opportunity.
I think if I can just say, Matthew, I really like your phrase of pressing the reset button on the farm, because what I do with the kitchen garden is just completely what my ancestors were doing, you know, years and years ago, and providing Padstow with all the veg, all the fruit. Oh, well, it was mainly ingredients for pasties is what they grew, but they were. I strongly believe that if I had carried on chefing and then my chefing career took me abroad, my mum and dad would probably now be looking to selling the farm, just because the hard work with the animals, the debt that can come with it, the daily, farming vegetables can be hard enough. Farming animals is even harder. You can't leave them. You need someone looking at them quite a lot. Dad makes sure they're checked half a dozen times a day, which means if he's not doing it, I'm doing it. And I think that exactly what you said was off the back of my kitchen garden. We've now got because everybody was coming out, and then people were like, oh, we could get married out here. We've got a wedding venue. Off the back of that, we've got a small farm shop. We've got a small herd of pedigree large black pigs, which are complete sellout sausages. We've started making profit this year for the first time. They're doing that's just making sausages. We got 150 packs of sausages and they sold out in 5 days. That's just people coming up to the shop. And that's all off the back of, with help from my mum and dad, off of the kitchen garden. And we've all worked together. And if you could have seen the farm 10 years ago, how Jack, remember when he first started coming out, like how it's still got its like wonky gates and whatnot, but how clean and safe and nice environment it is to come out. And I think you hit the nail on the head by saying, you know, we're just pressing the reset button.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Is there any more questions from the attendees? I haven't got any more typed questions coming up. If not, thank you all very much for your time. Ollie, Ross, Jack, absolutely excellent. It sounds like an incredibly exciting project. I hope it is hugely successful and gets off the ground very quickly. Certainly with my life traveling around the UK, farming and working in the media, there's a growing desire and a need for people to have a sustainable business, and often small scale helps in a great way because they haven't got a huge amount of land. So I can see this succeeding, and I think with the society changing, a certain section of the society changing in the way they think about what they eat, you know, there's every chance this will be fantastic. Thank you very much for all of you for attending, and we'll catch up with you again soon. And I think it's definitely time I came down and visited your farm, Ross, and stayed in the pig and ate with Jack. We'll catch up with you again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.